Welcome, listeners. I have Abby Adamson, the founder of the Culture Partnership, with me today. We are going to talk about global workplace culture strategies she's used for brands like Spotify, Sony Music, and Wise. She's also a LinkedIn top voice recognized by the New York Times and has done over 800 workshops on the topic of workplace culture. So, Abby, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me. Hi.
Well, hey, and so, we've all been on like this wild ride, this roller coaster ride of workplace culture, work. And I'm just curious, Abby, like, what has it been like for you to be a practitioner of the work? Like, walk us through your mindset, especially over the last year that I know I can relate to a lot of sleepless nights knowing what does the future of our work hold?
Yeah. I think language has changed massively. If you think about, we've always had inclusion work, for example. I think inclusion work is, I know that DEI is a dirty word, so to speak, right now, and that's across both sides of the Atlantic. But diversity, equity, and inclusion has always existed. It's just changed words over the last few decades. I think what we've definitely seen over the last 12 months is that people like myself have had to pivot the language. The work still remains the same. I'm still heavily invested in people and setting people up for success within the workplace. Um, and whether that is writing inclusion frameworks or whether that is talking about how to make sure your workplace is built up equitably. So, whoever you are, however you identify, whatever your background, you still have the same opportunities. Those things I don't think have changed. Maybe how we speak about them and what kind of terminology that we use has changed, but the end work, the foundation that it's built on, I still believe remains the same. You still
Yeah.
have people in the workforce.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a very diverse set of folks that are in the workforce, Abby. What have you found? I mean, I just love your presence. I know we've followed each other on LinkedIn for some time, and I love really your upbeat attitude during times of like significant distress. Like, how do
Yeah.
you keep kind of that positive, how do you balance, right, that positive energy with like the real reality that things are challenging?
That's a great question. I think for me, I lean on history. History has always taught us whenever big changes happen, there's always resistance. Without the civil rights movement, without the suffragettes, without all of those moments, women wouldn't be where they are. Black and brown people wouldn't be able to have the vote. Redlining would still be, I mean, we know it happens, but maybe not as obviously anymore. So I believe that every time we are going in the right way, there should be some resistance. And that keeps me positive because I know the pendulum is going to swing the other way. Right now, it seems very hopeless. It seems very negative. It's very bleak and, dreary. But as someone who looks at the glass as half full rather than half empty, and is a forever optimist, because I know that pendulum is going to swing, that keeps me going because I look back at the 60s and the 70s and the early 90s. And every time there's been some kind of resistance, it is because people want things to happen for the better. So that's what keeps me positive. That's why I write really positive pieces. That's why I remind people that without all of the things that happened yesterday, we all wouldn't be here in the way and we wouldn't have these liberties that we have right now. So that's my take, is just that we know through history that whilst we don't want it to repeat itself, but we do know through the lessons of history that to get to a good place, you do need to go through a bit of a gauntlet.
Yeah. Yeah. If you look at historical figures, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. himself was not very popular during his own
No,
lifetime. And now
yeah.
you think about that, it's like that was obvious. But back then, there was a lot, of overt racism where it tends to be more covert now. And so these challenging times, as much as they are, like we've been here before. And I
Hmm.
also find like great solace in looking at like the lessons learned from those historical periods. And
Exactly.
from my perspective, I'm curious, Abby, on your perspective, like the power of there's two things I'm seeing as far as like that we can focus on even in these turbulent times is one, like you said, the language changes, the work doesn't. But the power of bringing in our allies, especially those folks in positions of power that can make decisions. We saw a landslide of companies doing the wrong thing a year ago, but I see a lot of companies stepping back in. Target has been, a target of a lot of waffling, right? And they lost out. They had to hire a new CEO. They lost out on foot traffic last year. Since they're making more of a bold insertion into the situation in Minneapolis. So that's kind of curious, like to me, is like, there's like not pure bad or pure good. Like there's a lot of in between. So I'm just
Hmm.
curious what you think about this time and how we bring allies and organizations with power into the conversation.
Yes, you have the targets, absolutely. But the power lies with the people. And we've seen that. We've seen, as you said, Target has become a target. And I'm laughing because I'm like, couldn't have happened to worse people. So I'm like, I don't, you are a product of your own undoing.
Right.
Because because when you carry black and brown lines with made by LGBTQ plus folks, and you turn your back on them, we have every right to be, and women as well. We have every right, obviously, it's the intersectionality piece because there's a myriad of identities, and without even playing into identity politics, when you just say to your people that we don't really care about you, the bottom line is our finances, we can say, okay, cool. You saw what happened with Disney when they took Jimmy Kimmel off air. They lost $4 billion in 48 hours because people are like, hold on a second, there's cancel culture and there's being a totalitarian. And when people are like, okay, this is now not cancel culture is what Target went through. Being a totalitarian and saying you cannot be on air unless you side with me is very different. So for me, I think it's I again being an optimist, I focus on the companies that are doing well. I focus on the Elf Beauties. I focus on the Costco's, the ones that have doubled down and said, our people are our biggest currency. We are not going to turn back on the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, with some of these companies that work with us because somebody said so. We're not going to turn our backs on people who are legacy holders that have been working here for 20, 30 years because somebody said so. So whilst yes, we can focus on I don't know all these American companies like Target, and I forget the other company. I know that they're green and white logo, but they also backtracked, and it's just like that's fine. But I know, honestly, Julie, today, what is today? The 26th of the first, 2026. I know that a lot of these companies, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe even sooner, are going to come back with their tail between their legs saying, forgive us, we did wrong.
Yeah.
We and they can't even use the excuse of we were under pressure, we had government contracts, we they can't really use that because again there are so many other companies that have been like, okay, yeah, we're also in the
Yeah.
firing line, and but we chose to side with our people because we know our people make the organization what it is. And when we're talking about consumers can see that and they will either reward us or penalize us with their pockets.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just, when I talk about workplace culture, I know this sounds terrible, I don't really care about the targets.
Yeah.
Why should I care about an organization that doesn't care about its people? What I do care about are the Costco's and as I said, the Elf Beauties, the Gaps that have doubled down. And Gap is actually one of my fan favorites. Is that Gap's always been inclusive. They've always really okay. I'm not saying there's no organization that's perfect, including the Costco, including the Elf Beauties. No organization is perfect, but if we think about how they've always been invested in showing diversity, how they've always been invested in showing inclusivity, how they've always been invested in showing equitable practices. Um, this is what we all should be focusing on.
Yeah.
Because again, these are the organizations that have kept us protected, that have kept their people protected. And so These are the ones I celebrate. I honestly
Yeah.
couldn't give a monkeys about the targets because the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I hear you. As somebody that I just moved far away from Costco, well, an hour or so, and make my bi-weekly Costco run and invest a lot of money back into that business.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
is like you have to do a little extra effort as a consumer. And, it's
Mhm.
to your point, like there's not a pure good or bad. If occasionally you have to shop at a store that doesn't support
Yeah,
your values, like it happens. And I think just
absolutely.
paying attention to the way companies are treating people right now.
Hmm.
And it's in trying times that you really learn, not the lip service of 2020,
Yeah.
but the real values of organizations. And Abby, I know you have a new book coming out this summer
Yes.
about workplace
Yes,
culture.
I do.
Um, so tell us more, like, what does the workplace need to do to have like a healthy, inclusive workplace culture?
What excites me about the pendulum swinging the other way, and I've said this a few times, but what excites me is that belonging, it finally has hard numbers. So Boston Consulting Group, they found that employees who are authentic can bring their whole selves to work. Well, let me not say whole selves, who can bring their true selves, because whole selves and true selves, I think, are very different. We don't always want people to bring their whole selves to work, but we do want them to bring their authentic selves. And they're 2.4 times, they're 2.4 times less likely to quit. And what is really exciting about workplace culture is that people, especially during these tumultuous times, are beginning to see that. Organizations still treat culture like a construction project instead of what it is. And I call workplace culture a living ecosystem. So for my book, I developed a framework called CERN, SERN. So the S stands for soil. So the soil means what people actually experience daily within the workplace, not what's on your value poster. The E stands for exposure. Who gets visibility and opportunity versus who stays in the shadows. The R stands for roots, the whisper networks and the group chats where the real culture lives, not necessarily what you see in your Slacks or your um, Microsoft Teams meeting. And then the N stands for nutrients, who gets fed growth opportunities versus who's starving. So one of the things I say when I work with CEOs and CFOs and CMOs and CPOs, all these CCCs, is that your culture is already growing exactly the way it was designed to grow. If talent keeps leaving, that's not a bug in the system. That's your ecosystem telling you who it was built for. So when I put this framework together, I was really thinking about people, not treating people as a monolith, treating people as the individuals they are, and understand what Julie Kratz needs to feel like you belong in the workplace, to feel like you are set up for success, to feel like you are being exposed to the right opportunities and the right growth is very different to what an Abby Adamson needs. But know that it doesn't have to be a push and pull thing. We can work together. Organizations can work to make sure that all employees get the best out of their people. Um, and I went with the growth metaphor because a lot of organizations are very stagnant, are very dry. And so when I was thinking about the framework, I really wanted people to know that some organizations might not have all four problems. You might have a soil problem, you might have a roots problem, and you might have an exposure problem. So that's what I started. That's what I started thinking about more often. Like, for example, I worked with a tech company that had every program. They had ERGs, they had mentorship, they had fantastic benefits, but they couldn't figure out why their best talent kept leaving after 18 months. And when I sat down with them and I mapped out the roots, I found that they had certain whisper networks where people within the organization were warning other folks which managers to avoid, which projects to not take on because that was a career graveyard, and I also found out that their soil was toxic, even though their program looked healthy. So they didn't necessarily have a retention problem, but they had a truth problem where people couldn't speak to the leaders within the business to say, hey, this is what we're finding. So that's where I started thinking of the analogy of plants and gardening and growth. But yeah, workplace culture, we know that there's not a one size fits all approach. It's very much how long is a piece of string, which no one can ever answer that question. But especially during these times, especially when your people are scared, when your people are anxious, when your people don't know what the future looks like for them within their organizations, this is now the time to really have a look at your organization as an ecosystem rather than a fixed building, such, if I can think of that analogy, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And what I like about this is, I think the conundrum of our work has always been, individuals versus systems. And I don't like that framing because there's things that need to happen at an individual level and tools and meeting people where they're at with their needs, like you talked about. But there's also a systemic issue that usually a lot of individuals are facing. And it's going back to what's the business problem. And a lot of people do articulate it with talent retention, talent attraction. Those are quantifiable business problems. But like as you just said, it was a truth problem. So like digging deep and asking why to get to the root of what the business problem is. And then when we know we have a truth problem and like this undercurrent,
Yeah.
of, people talking about the problem, I struggle with organizations sometimes because it's like they know that there's like talking happening and people are leaving in 18
For
months, but they like
sure.
almost don't want to know why because it's like if I know why, then I have to fix that problem, Abby.
Actually, Julie, that's in my book. That what you just said there is in my book. They know why. They might not know, like the wonderful thing about being an external consultant, an external partner is people tend to be a lot more honest with me than they would be within, I don't know, a employee engagement form, But you know why you're hemorrhaging people. You know why you have expectant parents who don't come back to work. You know why that's happening. But as you say, they would rather go with ignorance is bliss and keep paying. We know that to recruit is a hell of a lot of money. They would rather do all of that and hemorrhage money than sit with the truth and examine their soil, look at and go through the certain framework basically. But I take them on a journey that softens the blow for sure.
Yeah, I find that too. It's like, oh, but we just did this big event, or we have employee resource groups. And it's like the performative stuff is just so
Yeah,
attractive for
yeah,
organizations, but it's not effective. Like those aren't the things, those are great, but it's not the reason why people stay. People stay
exactly.
because they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel a sense of belonging, they can surface their truth and speak truth to power. And there are just very few organizations that do those things well, consistently and intentionally. So I'm just
Yeah.
curious, Abby, like, have you seen organizations like with a healthy workplace culture or pieces and parts of healthy workplace cultures? Like, are there commonalities that you see in the model, like tangible things that organizations do regularly to maintain that kind of culture?
I think the biggest thing that I can say that separates a good organization. The reason why I'm not using great, I'm being very pedantic with my words, is because every organization can work on something, But what separates maybe a bad organization to a good organization is always the leaders. And I don't necessarily mean about culture. I think everyone, whether you are a C-suite leader to a new graduate, all of you are part of building the culture. However, but it is a waterfall effect. You mimic and you show the behaviors that you have seen leaders do. So where I see bad cultures is normally when leaders in an organization, and I mean people and even managers, so anyone with influence, power and influence within an organization, chooses not to use it, chooses to be deliberately obtuse because it serves them. As I said, many organizations, they're working absolutely fine because the way it was, the way they're growing is designed for particular people to succeed. It's designed for those who went to Ivy League universities and or those who were born into wealth and or those who are very well connected to succeed versus those who have genuinely worked hard to get where they but are not being exposed in the same way. But the organizations that are doing well are organizations that are able to say, hey, we need to take a step back. We need to have a look at our soil. We need to examine the roots. We need to, oh, hold on a second. Joe Blogs has been on those 4 projects now, even though Jane Blogs has had great ideas. Maybe we need to swap them out. Being able to have those conversations. I've been watching Mad Men. This is my first time watching Mad Men, and when I mean, it's horrific, the sexism and stuff like that. But obviously, it's indicative of the times, right? But I was thinking about certain people that kept on getting all the same type of projects, or who Don would champion versus those that he would be like, oh, clearly not. And I was thinking about how this shows up in today's day and age in 2025, 2026. I think that's the biggest thing is the moment a leader or leaders in organizations are able to have or able to have candid conversations with their people, but candid conversations whilst fostering psychological safety, that changes overnight. When an organization has psychological safety whereby someone can go to a leader and say, hey, this isn't working. I didn't like what happened in that meeting, or I think I've got a better idea for a project, or please put me in front of the client. I think I can deliver, I can make this a home run. Have those kind of conversations without being rejected, without being in fear of their job, without being in fear of a promotion, losing a promotion or a salary increase. When you're able to have an organization that's built on psychological safety, everything else will follow.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's an individual and systemic thing because you have to have a culture that supports that, where,
Exactly.
Joe speaks up and reprimanded, everyone else now knows you can't do that. And so it
Exactly.
takes people in power modeling it for people to modeling that they're going to do it and that others can do it with them for it to really become a cultural norm and
Exactly.
expectation. And I find, I've done a bunch of psychological safety workshops over the years and allyship workshops. And I know, we measure knowledge difference pre and post, and, what is the ROI in that knowledge and action, and ask some of those systemic questions. But I find it's really the organizations that take a deep look at their values, their, systemic processes from recruiting and hiring to how they manage performance and pay
Hmm.
that really get to the roots of it. Like you mentioned the project assignments, how we assign projects, like who gets the
Yep.
stretch opportunities, who gets the candid constructive feedback that's helpful for
Yeah.
career growth. These types of little systemic tentacles might seem like in isolation not a big deal, but collectively a very massive deal. And so
Yeah.
I love that analogy. I often say we're planting seeds. We're planting
Yeah.
seeds, and those plants will
Yeah.
grow not
I
maybe
mean,
this year, but sometime.
I absolutely, I called my book Culture Blooming. The full title is Culture Blooming, Nurturing a Workplace Where People Grow. The reason why I called it Culture Blooming is blooming isn't a destination, it's a process. You don't build a garden and walk away. You tend to it. You watch beautiful things grow. And the organizations that thrive, those organizations will be gardeners, not architects. And I sign off a lot of my TEDx talk, my last line in my book, last line in a lot of my posts is we bloom together or we wilt alone. That's not a tagline. That's the reality of organizational ecosystems. So the question isn't whether your culture has problems. The question is whether you're willing to see them clearly enough to change them.
I love that. I love that line, Abby.
Thank
So the
you.
book's out this summer,
The
Culture
book is out.
Blooming.
Yeah, 25th of August. Culture Blooming. Yes.
So tell us the best way for listeners to stay in touch with you between now and then. I will say Abby's a great LinkedIn follow. So ABI
A,
Adamson.
yeah, yeah.
Follow her
ABI.
LinkedIn picture. Yes. Well,
Yes. Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. Connect with me on Substack if you want to really, I'm going to be doing a lot of culture work and sharing insights on workplace culture and Substack. That's a big one for me. Connect with me on Instagram. It's at the Abby Adamson. Um, yeah, just yeah, I'm in the spaces. I'm I'm there, but LinkedIn is probably the best place to. I'm always on LinkedIn. I've always got aha moments where I try and share workplace culture quotes from my book, and moments where I have aha moments and like 3 o'clock in the morning. So you will see a lot of insights that around workplace culture, and around how you grow your people, how you set your people up for success, how you check for challenges within the soil, how you look for the exposure people are getting, how you sift through the roots, and how you distribute the nutrients. You will see a lot of that in a lot of my work. So I try and post at least 2 or 3 of those a week on LinkedIn. So
yeah.
and then you get the full body of it on Substack. So follow me in all the places for sure.
Awesome, Abby. Thanks so much. I appreciate your voice and
Oh, thank you
thanks for
for
being with
inviting
us.
me. Yeah, thank you.